After a decade of loyalty and hard work, Emily's life is shattered when her boss, Mr. Harrington, falsely accuses her of embezzling company funds, a scheme he orchestrated to save himself from exposure. Humiliated and jobless, Emily vows to fight back, uncovering Harrington's years of corruption and fraud. But her quest for revenge turns into a dangerous chess game as she dismantles his empire piece by piece, building her own firm from the ashes of his crumbling legacy. Just as she closes in on victory, Harrington strikes back with a scandal that could destroy her career forever. In a world where power and betrayal go hand in hand, Emily must risk everything to expose the truth and reclaim her life. Will she emerge victorious, or will revenge cost her more than she ever imagined? The morning it all started was just like any other. I got to the office early, as I always did, sipping my usual overpriced latte and sifting through my project files for the day. The Harrington and Company building stood tall in the heart of downtown, a testament to years of Mr. Harrington's success. I was proud to have been part of that success. A decade of my life had been spent here, working my way up from the bottom. I'd sacrificed weekends, vacations, even relationships to prove my worth. And until that day, I thought it had all been worth it. "Morning, Emily," chirped Sarah, the receptionist, as I passed her desk. "Morning," I replied with a smile. "Big day today. We're finalizing the Lakeshore deal." Sarah gave me a thumbs up, but something in her expression felt off. She wasn't her usual bubbly self. Before I could dwell on it, I was already halfway down the hallway to my office, ready to dive into the numbers one last time before presenting them to the board. The Lakeshore project was going to be one of the company's most lucrative developments, a sprawling luxury apartment complex right on the waterfront. It was my brainchild, my baby, and I'd spent the last 2 years perfecting every detail. An email pinged on my laptop just as I settled in. The subject line was simple: "We need to talk." It was from Mr. Harrington himself. No greeting, no context, just those 4 words. I frowned. Normally, our communication was more cordial. Sure, he was my boss, but after 10 years, I considered him more of a mentor. I brushed off the unease creeping up my spine, assuming he just wanted a last-minute update on the Lakeshore deal. When I stepped into his corner office a few minutes later, the tension hit me like a wall. Mr. Harrington sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by something cold and hard. His gray eyes pierced through me as he motioned for me to sit. "I need you to explain this," he said, sliding a folder across the desk toward me. Confused, I opened it and scanned the documents inside. My heart stopped. It was a series of invoices, dozens of them, bearing my name and signature. Each one was linked to suspicious transactions, siphoning funds from the company into what looked like a private account under my name. I blinked, my mind racing to process what I was looking at. I don't understand," I stammered. "This isn't me. I never approved these." Mr. Harrington leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Emily, you've been with this company for a long time. I trusted you. And this is how you repay me? By stealing? Stealing." My voice cracked as panic bubbled in my chest. "I didn't do this. I swear. Someone must have." "Stop." He held up a hand, cutting me off. "The evidence is right there. We've already contacted the auditors, and HR is drafting up the paperwork. You're done here. And don't think for a second that I won't involve the authorities." My stomach churned. This couldn't be happening. "Please, you have to believe me. I've been nothing but loyal to this company. Why would I steal from you?" His gaze didn't waver. "People get greedy, Emily. Even the ones you think you can trust." I opened my mouth to protest again, but he was already standing, signaling that the conversation was over. "Clear out your office by the end of the day. Security will escort you out." The walk back to my office felt like a death march. My legs were shaking, my mind racing. As I passed my coworkers, I could feel their eyes on me, hear their whispers behind my back. The humiliation was suffocating. By the time I reached my desk, Sarah was already there with 2 security guards. Her expression was pitying, but she said nothing. I stuffed my belongings into a box, my hands trembling. My nameplate, my framed photo of my parents, my awards for outstanding performance, all of it felt meaningless now. The guards didn't speak to me, just hovered nearby like I was a criminal. As I was escorted out of the building, the finality of it all hit me like a freight train. My career, my reputation, my life as I knew it, it was all gone. I spent the next few days in a haze of despair, replaying the events over and over in my mind. I'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and it had all been destroyed in an instant. But as the initial shock wore off, anger began to take its place. None of this made sense. I knew I hadn't stolen anything, which meant someone had set me up. But who? And why? That's when I decided to fight back. If Mr. Harrington and his team thought they could ruin me without consequences, they were dead wrong. I started combing through every email, every document, every scrap of information I'd saved over the years. And that's when I found it, a series of emails between Mr. Harrington and one of his offshore accountants. The language was vague, but it was clear they were discussing moving company funds into a private account. His private account. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He was the one stealing from the company. And he'd framed me to cover his tracks. My anger turned white-hot. I wasn't just some expendable employee he could throw under the bus to save his own skin. I'd given 10 years of my life to that company, and he'd destroyed me without a second thought. He might have thought I'd crawl away quietly, but he underestimated me. If he wanted a scapegoat, I'd give him something to fear instead. The days that followed were filled with sleepless nights, my mind spinning with plans and possibilities. But revenge, I quickly realized, couldn't be rushed. If I wanted to take Mr. Harrington down, I couldn't act out of blind rage. I needed to be methodical, strategic, and most importantly, patient. I started small. I spent hours combing through every document I had access to from my years at Harrington and Company. Old emails, project files, even seemingly innocuous meeting notes. I searched for anything that could connect the dots on his embezzlement scheme. If I was going to bring him down, I needed hard evidence. And there was plenty of it, buried in the details. The offshore accounts were the key. Those vague emails I'd found were just the beginning. With the help of a tech-savvy friend from college, I traced some of the transactions listed in the emails back to real accounts, hidden in tax havens halfway around the world. They weren't under Mr. Harrington's name, of course. That would have been too easy. But the shell companies tied to those accounts all led back to one of his private holding companies. He'd been siphoning money from company accounts for years, laundering it through these shell corporations, and funneling it into his offshore empire. The deeper I dug, the more disgusted I became. This man, who had spent years lecturing us on integrity and loyalty, had been stealing millions from his own company. And when it looked like the auditors were closing in, he'd thrown me to the wolves to save himself. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on, my determination. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Still, the evidence alone wasn't enough. I couldn't just walk into the police station and expect them to take my word for it. Harrington was powerful, with deep connections in the city. If I wanted my accusations to stick, I needed to weaken his position first. I needed to hit him where it hurt the most, his business. Using the contacts I'd made during my time at Harrington and Company, I started reaching out to his biggest clients. These were multimillion-dollar developers, investors, and corporations who had relied on Harrington's firm for years. Many of them knew me personally from my work on their projects. I approached them carefully, gauging their dissatisfaction with Harrington's recent performance. It wasn't hard to find cracks in his relationships. A few delayed deals here, some cost overruns there, nothing catastrophic, but enough to plant the seed of doubt. I presented myself as an alternative. I told them I was starting my own firm, built on transparency and ethical practices. I promised them better deals, faster turnarounds, and, most importantly, none of the shady behavior they'd grown used to from Harrington. To my surprise, many of them were receptive. It turned out I wasn't the only one Harrington had burned over the years. He'd bullied clients, overcharged them, and made enemies in the process. One by one, they started agreeing to work with me, quietly, of course. They didn't want to alert Harrington just yet. But the cracks in his empire were starting to spread. It wasn't easy. Starting a new firm from scratch was a massive undertaking, especially with the cloud of my firing hanging over me. My name had been dragged through the mud, and there were plenty of people who believed I was guilty of the theft Harrington had accused me of. But I didn't let it stop me. I knew that action spoke louder than words, and once I started delivering results, people would see the truth. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Harrington. The beauty of the real estate world was that rumors traveled fast. It didn't take long for word to get back to me that he was struggling to keep his clients happy. With some of his biggest accounts quietly pulling out, his cash flow was drying up. And the board of directors was starting to ask questions. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure that when Harrington finally fell, he'd have no way to recover. The next step was riskier. I needed to get someone on the inside. I reached out to an old friend who still worked at Harrington and Company, Lisa, one of the junior accountants. She was one of the few people who hadn't turned their back on me after I was fired. In fact, she'd been one of the first to text me, saying she didn't believe the accusations for a second. When I told her about Harrington's embezzlement, she wasn't surprised. "I always thought something shady was going on with the accounts," she said during one of our late-night phone calls. "But I didn't think he'd frame you for it. That's next-level evil." Lisa agreed to help me, though it wasn't without risk. If Harrington caught wind of what we were doing, she'd lose her job, or worse. But she was as fed up with him as I was, and she wanted to see him pay for what he'd done. Together, we started gathering more evidence. She had access to internal financial records, emails, and other documents that painted an even clearer picture of Harrington's crimes. By this point, my new firm was gaining traction. I'd secured a few high-profile clients, which gave me the financial backing I needed to expand. I hired a small but talented team, people I trusted, people who believed in my vision. And slowly but surely, we started building a reputation. Word began to spread about my firm, and with each new client we landed, Harrington's empire weakened. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Harrington was still at the top, still living his luxurious life, while I had to fight tooth and nail to rebuild what he destroyed. I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose everything. That's when I made my boldest move yet. Using the funds from my new firm, I quietly acquired the office building where Harrington and Company was headquartered. It was a risky investment, but I knew it would be worth it. His lease was set to expire in a few months, and when it did, I planned to evict him. By the time he found out what I'd done, it would be too late. The first sign that Mr. Harrington knew something was wrong came in the form of an unexpected phone call. Lisa texted me late one evening, just as I was wrapping up a long day at the office. FYI, her message read, "Harrington's been stomping around all day. Heard him on the phone, he's losing clients. He knows something's up." I allowed myself a small smile. It had taken months of careful planning, but the cracks in his empire were starting to widen. Still, I knew I couldn't get too comfortable. Harrington wasn't the kind of man to sit back and let his world crumble without a fight. If anything, I expected him to lash out, and I was ready for it. Meanwhile, my own firm was thriving. After landing a major deal with one of the city's largest developers, I finally felt like I was regaining the professional reputation he tried to destroy. My team was small but dedicated, and together we were proving that the real estate world didn't have to be built on backroom deals and corruption. Clients loved the transparency we brought to the table, and word of mouth was spreading fast. Every success felt like a small victory against Harrington, but the biggest one was yet to come. The eviction notice was sent out 2 weeks later. Lisa had kept me informed of Harrington's every move inside his company, and I knew his lease renewal was coming up. What he didn't know was that I'd been quietly working with the building's owners for months, negotiating a deal to buy the property. It was one of the riskiest moves I'd ever made, but the payoff was worth it. When the notice finally landed on his desk, the fallout was immediate. Lisa called me that same day, barely able to contain her laughter. "You should have seen him," she said. He threw the notice across the room and started yelling about how this was some kind of mistake. He had no idea it was you. I could picture it in my mind, Harrington's carefully curated world crumbling around him. But I wasn't finished yet. The eviction was a power play, but it was also a strategic move. By forcing Harrington and company to vacate their headquarters, I was disrupting their entire operation. Moving offices would cost them time and money they couldn't afford to lose, especially with so many clients already jumping ship. It was a calculated strike, designed to hit him where it hurt the most. But Harrington wasn't going down without a fight. A week after the eviction notice, I received an email from his lawyer. It was a thinly veiled threat, accusing me of interfering with his business relationships and suggesting that legal action might be taken. I knew it was an empty threat. He didn't have a leg to stand on, but it was a reminder that I needed to stay sharp. Around this time, Lisa uncovered something that would change everything. While digging through the company's financial records, she stumbled upon a set of files that Harrington had tried to bury. They were older documents, dating back to before I was even hired, but they painted a damning picture of his long history of fraud. He'd been cooking the books for years, not just to funnel money into his offshore accounts but to inflate the company's value and secure lucrative loans from investors. "This is it," Lisa said when she sent me the files. "This is the smoking gun." And she was right. The evidence was undeniable. Harrington hadn't just framed me, he'd built his entire empire on lies and theft. Armed with this new information, I knew it was time to take the next step. The first thing I did was contact the board of directors. Harrington's position as CEO was already shaky, thanks to the exodus of clients and the growing scrutiny on the company's finances. I anonymously sent the board the incriminating documents Lisa had found, along with a detailed explanation of how Harrington had been embezzling company funds. I knew they wouldn't be able to ignore it. The fallout was swift. Within days, the board launched a full investigation into Harrington's financial dealings. Word spread quickly, and the media caught wind of the scandal. Headlines blared, "Real estate mogul under investigation for fraud," and "Harrington and Company. CEO accused of embezzlement." Harrington tried to deny everything, of course. He released a statement calling the allegations baseless and claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign. But the evidence was too strong, and the board wasn't willing to go down with him. They voted to suspend him as CEO pending the outcome of the investigation. For the first time, I felt like I was finally getting my life back. Harrington had spent months trying to destroy me, but now the tables had turned. He was the one facing humiliation, the one being escorted out of the building he'd once ruled like a king. And the best part? He still didn't know I was behind it all. But I wasn't done yet. With Harrington out of the picture, his company was in freefall. Many of the remaining clients had lost faith in the firm and were looking for alternatives. My team and I were ready to step in. We launched a targeted campaign, reaching out to former Harrington and Company clients and offering them better deals and personalized service. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, we doubled our client base, and my firm was on track to surpass Harrington and Company in revenue. It was a victory I'd fought hard for, but it also came with a bittersweet realization: revenge, no matter how satisfying, couldn't erase the pain of betrayal. Still, I wasn't about to let Harrington off the hook. The investigation into his financial crimes was ongoing, and with the evidence Lisa and I had provided, it was only a matter of time before the authorities got involved. I wanted to see him face real consequences, not just the loss of his company, but the loss of his freedom. When I heard that the police had raided his home and seized his financial records, I knew the end was near. Harrington had spent years building an empire on lies, but now the entire house of cards was collapsing. And this time, there was no one left to blame. Harrington's fall from grace was everything I had imagined it would be. The police raid, the headlines, the board's public statement cutting ties with him, it all played out like a meticulously written drama. But as I watched it unfold, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Justice had been served, yes. Revenge had been sweet, no doubt. Yet there was an emptiness I hadn't anticipated, a sense that this wasn't over. I should have known better. Harrington wasn't the type to go down quietly. And he proved that with a single phone call. It was late one night when my phone buzzed on the edge of my desk. I'd been poring over the details of a new project and his name lit up my screen. I stared at it, my stomach twisting into knots. Why would he call me? After everything, after all I'd done to destroy him, why now? Against my better judgment, I picked up. "What do you want, Harrington?" His voice, once commanding and confident, was raspy and bitter. "Emily. I hope you're enjoying your little victory lap. But we both know you didn't win." I laughed, but it was laced with unease. "Didn't win? Last I checked, you lost your company, your reputation, and your clients. You're one step away from prison. So tell me, how exactly did I not win?" There was a long pause, the silence heavy. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Because you didn't take everything into account. You might have ruined me, but I'm not the only one with skeletons in the closet." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you, Emily," he sneered. "I didn't pick you as my scapegoat by accident. You're not as innocent as you think." My grip on the phone tightened. "What the hell are you talking about?" Harrington let out a low chuckle, the sound of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Remember the Lakeshore deal? The one you were so proud of? You should. It's the crown jewel of your career, isn't it? But here's what you don't know, that land you negotiated for, the permits you pushed through, it wasn't clean. There were some irregularities. Bribes. Kickbacks. Things that could ruin you just as much as they've ruined me." My heart sank. The Lakeshore project had been my biggest achievement, a deal I'd worked on for years. But I'd always trusted Harrington's legal team to handle the finer details, like zoning laws and permits. Had they crossed the line? And if so, how much of it could be traced back to me? "You're lying," I said, but my voice was unsteady. "If that were true, you would have used it against me months ago." "Oh, I considered it," he said, his tone dripping with venom. "But back then, you were just an employee. A useful pawn. Now. You're a threat. And I'm not going to sit back and let you take everything from me." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Could there be truth to what he'd said? Had I unknowingly been complicit in something illegal? The next day, I called Lisa. I explained everything Harrington had said, hoping she could help me sort fact from fiction. She promised to dig into the Lakeshore files, but her voice was laced with doubt. "Emily, if he's telling the truth, this could be bad. Like, really bad." A week later, Lisa called me back, and her tone told me everything I needed to know. "Emily, he wasn't lying. I found the original permits for the Lakeshore project. They're full of red flags. Payments to city officials, falsified environmental impact reports, it's all there. And your name's on the documents." I sank into my chair, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't sign off on any of that." "I know," Lisa said gently. "But it doesn't matter. On paper, it looks like you did." Harrington had set me up, even back then. The Lakeshore deal had been his ace in the hole all along, a way to tie me to his corruption if I ever turned against him. And now, with his back against the wall, he was using it as a weapon. The media got hold of the story a week later. The headlines were brutal: "Whistleblower behind Harrington's fall faces corruption scandal," and "Rising real estate star linked to fraudulent deals." My name was dragged through the mud once again, this time on a much larger scale. The irony wasn't lost on me. After months of fighting to clear my name, I was right back where I started. The fallout was swift. Some of my new clients pulled out of their contracts, afraid of being associated with the scandal. Investors hesitated to fund my projects. And though I wasn't charged with a crime, the stain on my reputation was impossible to ignore. Harrington had succeeded in pulling me down to his level. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't done fighting. I released a public statement, acknowledging the allegations but denying any intentional wrongdoing. I framed myself as a victim of Harrington's corruption, just like the company, the clients, and the investors he'd betrayed. I promised to cooperate fully with any investigations and pledged to rebuild my firm on a foundation of integrity. It was a gamble, but it worked. Slowly, I began to regain the trust of my clients. Some even admired my resilience, saying it proved I could survive anything. But behind closed doors, I was furious. Harrington had played his final card, and while it hadn't destroyed me completely, it had left its mark. But the scandal didn't save him. 2 months later, he was formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. The evidence was overwhelming, and he had no allies left to shield him. The day he was sentenced to 12 years in prison was the day I finally felt a sense of closure. Even so, his parting gift to me lingered. The Lakeshore scandal haunted me, a reminder that revenge isn't clean, and the past has a way of catching up to you. I'd won the war, but not without scars. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Harrington had tried to destroy me, and in the end, he was the one who lost everything. But as I watched him being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I realized something: justice and revenge might feel similar, but they're not the same. Justice is about balance, about righting a wrong. Revenge? That's about survival. And sometimes, survival comes at a cost. I paid mine in full. And I'd pay it again if I had to. Because in the end, I wasn't the same person I was when this all started. I was stronger. Sharper. And I'd learned the most important lesson of all: never let your guard down, even when you think you've won.